Welcome to today's episode of Rainer on Leadership. My name is Thom Rainer. I'm joined by Sam Rainer, and we hope whether you're watching on YouTube or whether you're hearing it on your favorite audio podcasting app, that you will understand that this is a place for great leadership lessons and advice for the local church. We are going to be talking about a somewhat sensitive topic because it's gotten a lot of play on social media. Some of it's not been the prettiest play in the world, and it is the topic of plagiarizing sermons. We're not trying to stir up controversy. What we're trying to do is answer questions that have been coming to us as a result of all of this noise that has been taking place about plagiarism. So we're not going to isolate specific incidences. You probably know.
No, but that would be so much more fun to start naming names, Dad.
And that would cause a lot of folks to come to our site and to come to this podcast and YouTube presentation. So we could really draw up a lot more traffic, but that is not the purpose. Hey, before we get started, let us thank Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. They want to help you get the training you need to pursue your ministry from anywhere in the world. And if you apply to them using our name, Church Answers, without a space, they will waive your application fee. So no matter what stage of life's journey you find yourself, we want to help you take the next step in getting equipped to disciple and teach others. In coming to Southeastern, you'll find that seminary isn't just about theological education. It is about ministry preparation. Explore degrees, schedule a visit, or apply today at sebts.edu. And just as a note, Sam has a brother and I have a son, the same one, who is an alum of Southeastern Seminary and has nothing but great things to say. And
I'm an alum too.
You are an alum too?
I'm an alum of Southeastern Seminary.
Okay, you want to explain yourself?
So I have a Master of Arts in Missiology from Southern Seminary. Yeah. And I have a PhD from Dallas Baptist.
Okay. We're talking about Southeastern Sam.
But I did my PhD concentration through Southeastern.
Oh, okay. So you are an alum there. You have taken a seminar.
I'm not a graduate.
You don't have to be a grad to be an alum.
Correct. I just didn't want to be, you're giving Art all the credit for being connected to Southeastern, and I just wanted to remind you that I'm connected too.
And we want to make certain that you know that Art Rainer deserves all the credit for being connected to Southeastern. He's also VP there. And we love Danny Aiken. We love Chuck Lawless. And we like, what's his name? Art Rainer. And we there's just so much to like about Southeastern. I've taught there many times, preached there many times, and just appreciate what is going on there. So let's get to this topic of plagiarism. The reality of it is you and I have talked about plagiarism many, many times before it became the hot topic that we've seen in recent months, recent weeks. It's really, and let me give you credit where credit is due. I rarely see someone who works to make certain that credit is given when you are speaking or writing about someone else, and you do. Most of the time in your church bulletin, I don't know if you do it all the time, but most of the time in church bulletin, you're actually citing sources. So you're not just saying it verbally, but you're actually letting the people see where you've got information so you don't risk plagiarism.
Yeah, I've certainly done that in the past, and we just restructured our bulletin, and I'm not doing that anymore. So your point is now invalid, but
no, it's not. It's one way to do it. You've done it in the past.
I have done it in the past. I actually used to put every source that I used in my sermon in the bulletin, just to let people know where I was getting my information. It may have been a bit of overkill. I'm not saying that everyone has to do that, but I felt like at the church that I was at the time where I began doing that, it was a college town. I had a lot of professors in my congregation, and I felt like it was good for them to know, hey, these are the people I'm reading that generated some of the ideas in the sermon.
So let's begin with this general principle. You need to cite verbally you need to cite verbally in writing every source verbally and in writing every source that you use to write a sermon. So I guess that we can narrow that down. You may be using a commentary or you may be using a concordance, and those are just general tools and may not have specific application. But if there's something where you are taking the gist of something was said, not even a direct quote, you need to cite that source one way or the other.
Absolutely. And I would lean on some of the academic standards here, although I don't think that all academic standards need to apply to sermons. Those are two different things. If it's not common knowledge, so if you're reading a couple of commentaries and both of them say roughly the same thing, just in a different way, I think you're safe to preach whatever that is without citing a source. But if it's a novel thought, or if it's a direct quote, or if it's a borrowed outline even, it's very easy just to mention that in the sermon and say, hey, I was reading this particular author in this particular book. They had a great outline. I'm going to use it for the sermon. And every time I've preached the story of the prodigal son, I've just said, Tim Keller does this better than me. I got a lot of my stuff from him. When I talk about the prodigal God, that idea comes from him. I'm going to share with you guys some of the things that I've learned from him. And then I just go ahead and preach the whole thing. And people know, okay, well, a lot of this material came from Tim Keller. And that particular text and that particular story, he just does it better than anybody else. So why would I reinvent the wheel? I just need to make sure that I say that I'm not reinventing the wheel.
Sure. And something that I'm seeing happen more and more, there are a lot of good sermon prep sites. Some of them provide illustrations. Some of them provide outlines. Some of them provide videos or just some kind of design for the sermon. And they're really good. But there's a danger there. Many of these sermon resource sites have maybe background information, or they may have application, or they may have a cool illustration. And there's the temptation at that sermon resource site to just then, hey, this is a resource, I'm going to pick it up and use it. Well, if you're picking up something, even though you are paying for it, you need to cite the source. And I'm seeing more and more of the younger Pastor Sam. And I know at my age, everybody's younger, but I'm seeing more of the younger pastors go to these sermon resource sites, and they're taking things verbatim because they say, hey, I paid for it. They need to cite their sources there as well.
Yeah, I think so. Just because you paid for it doesn't mean that you can cast it off as your own. I mean, you paid for that commentary. You paid for the book that you're reading.
True.
And, if you quote something directly from whatever printed material, a book, for instance, I think that's no different than even if you pay for somebody's sermon. It would be unethical for you to make it your own.
I know I've told you the story, and I've probably said it on the podcast in the past, but I can tell you this: I haven't said it on YouTube because we're fairly new to YouTube. So I'm going to tell you the story. The year was I may be off a year, but I'm going to say about 1992, 93, somewhere in there. I went to a conference at a campground assembly center in Alabama called Chaco Springs. And I went there because they had this new up-and-coming pastor that was going to lead us in a conference. His name was Rick Warren. Never heard of Purpose Driven. I don't think Rick had heard of Purpose Driven at this time. He had another model that would eventually become the Purpose Driven model. I'm trying to remember what it was, but that's not that important. Cameo, Contemporary Approaches to Ministry, Evangelism, and Organization. Did you remember? Did you Google?
I did not Google. I remembered.
I'm impressed.
No. Here's the thing. My hands were right here, and the YouTube viewers now know. Like, I wasn't typing.
I'm not accusing. I just ask. Just we're okay. I believe you. I really do believe you. So unless we have this thick Cameo notebook, and sometimes Rick is teaching and we're doing his classic fill in the blanks, and he said, here's an example of a Cameo type sermon. So it was in there, and somebody looked at it and said, this is great. Can I use it in my sermon? And he said, oh yeah, nothing's original, nothing new under the sun. Sure, you can use it. Well, Rick should have been careful because there were about 300 to 500 pastors that were there listening to him. And I go to I wake up on Sunday morning, and one of my deacons says, Thom, come here. And I said, yeah, what is it? He said, is there something going on in the Birmingham area that I need to know? I said, what are you talking about? With pastors. You're going to have to help me a little bit more. He said, well, yesterday's Saturday paper in the Birmingham News, I'm going to guess at least a dozen pastors were preaching the same sermon called How to Affair-Proof Your Marriage. That was the sample that Rick gave, and they put it in the ads in the Birmingham News back in the days when you advertised in print newspaper. And they all were saying, How to Affair-Proof Your Marriage. I wish the Birmingham News had said to one of these pastors, hey, somebody else is saying that. I'm just fortunate that I didn't copy it that morning either. I would have been tempted as well. But again, most of them did not cite the source of that. Because why? Rick had said, oh yeah, go in and use it. And so, we bring up the point. Permission is good. Permission and citation is best.
Well, and here's the thing. People have called and asked me to use some of my stuff before. I don't have a whole lot of people asking to use my sermons, but every now and then some will. And I just say, go for it. I'm totally fine with you using it. And so if they don't cite me, well, no skin off my back, because I gave them permission. It's not so much the person that you're borrowing from that you need to be concerned about if they've given you permission. You need to be concerned about your own church and how you might be perceived by them. They don't know that that's your buddy that you're borrowing from, and he said it was fine.
Right.
You need to make sure that you are seen as above reproach to your own congregation. And that's why citing the source is so important. Of course, you don't want to steal from somebody. I don't know many pastors that, really have it out to do that.
Sure.
But it's the perception with your own congregation. And unfortunately, because of COVID, most churches, almost every church has now got some sort of digital presence, and they're putting their sermons out there. So guess what? It's a lot easier to find things out. It's one thing if you preached it 10 years ago and there's not even a recording of it. People don't remember. But the internet puts things out there forever. And so something that you put out 5 years ago that's on your YouTube or your YouTube page or your podcast can come back to bite you. So just make sure that you're doing everything you can to be above reproach. I think a lot of...
Let me interrupt you just a minute. I'm just going to interrupt you for a reason. You're going to understand that. I want you to keep on talking and move on to the third point, because we're on video right now. And I just noticed that my computer came unplugged, and I don't want this to have to be edited out. So I'm going to make me disappear for a minute and go plug this thing in while you can continue talking, Sam. How is that to improvise when you see that your computer's come unplugged?
Well, Dad, we need to go plug you back in. So please take care of that. And I'll just, it's so that you are seen as above reproach within your own congregation. And you want to make sure that you are just being very careful, because things last, and they last forever on the internet. And our third point is this. Remember, it's more than specific words that can be plagiarized. Key thoughts and outlines are also subject to copying. So I think a lot of people...
I plugged in.
Are you back?
I'm in. I got the power. You don't remember that song? Never mind. No, just, you were saying, Sam?
I really need to start a change.org petition of Thom Rainer not singing online or on video or audio anymore.
Sam, when I am long gone from this world and you are here and you're presumably talking on a Church Answers pod and video cast, and you're going to say, I miss my dad singing those 60 songs.
I probably will. In all reality, I poke a lot of fun at you, but I probably will. And you actually have a decent voice. It's better than mine. So maybe I'm just jealous. Maybe I'm
saying my voice is better than yours is saying that someone who is 4 feet is taller than someone who is 2 feet. It is really not that big a deal.
I'm glad you that particular analogy or whatever it is. I'm glad you rephrased that, because the other one is inappropriate.
Yes.
Nowadays.
So, what you were saying before I so rudely interrupted us both with the plug-in and with the song, it's not just words. It's. I mean, for example, You gave one earlier, Tim Keller on the Prodigal Guide. The concept of the Prodigal Guide, maybe someone else has said it, but Tim Keller's the one that really got that type of phrase out there.
Oh, yeah. And that's why you need to make sure that you cite your sources. Because if I were to preach that sermon and say, guys, you've probably heard of the prodigal son. Prodigal means to spend it all, and that's what the son did. The younger son, he went and just spent it all. He squandered his wealth. But it's really God who spends it all. It's God who gave all. He's the prodigal God. And everyone's like, whoa, that's amazing. Well, what are they going to do? They're going to go Google that. They go, prodigal God. I've never heard of that. That's a great thought. They Google it, and then all this Tim Keller stuff comes up, and it's like, oh, well, we know where he got this now. It's not just that you're saying an exact quote. It's that the concept itself can also be plagiarism, particularly if it's something novel or unique or a different kind of perspective. And I'll just say this:
Yes.
we didn't put this in the outline. Don't use other people's illustrations.
Oh,
just don't do it.
Yes.
And even if you say, well, I'm going to tell this story and say that so and so experienced this, and even say that, it still does. You got to make your illustrations your own. I understand that theological content. You don't want to be novel every week with theological content because you'll just be a heretic. Where a lot of the novelty in a sermon comes from is presentation, illustration, and different things like that. And that's where, if you cite the content that is the heart of the message with all of the scholarship around it, and then make the illustrations your own, it still is your own sermon. I think where most people get in trouble is they borrow the outline and they borrowed all the illustrations, and it just doesn't even feel like your sermon. So do the hard work of creating your own illustrations to help shed some light on the text for your own people. Because that pastor up in Portland, Oregon has a very different context than the one in Birmingham, Alabama, has a very different context than the one in New York City. And so when you're using those personal illustrations from different people from all over, it falls flat. So I would say, even if you're using outlines or quotes or content or concepts, where you really need to do the work yourself is with your illustrations.
I'll give you one of my illustrations that was especially painful for the individuals involved. I was leading a Christian organization. There was a church in the community that did not have a pastor, and so it was not unusual for them to ask people from my organization to preach. 2 weeks in a row, both of the people from my organization preached the same Andy Stanley sermon. And
so the other way,
the deacons came to meet with me. That was early in my tenure there. And I said, well, this is off to a good start.
Yeah. So here's the other thing. If you're borrowing from, I don't know, Tim Keller, Alistair Begg, Andy Stanley, Greg Rochelle, everybody listens to them.
Yes.
And so if Andy preached that sermon like 6 weeks ago, there's probably a pretty good chance that somebody in your church heard that sermon from him.
Somebody heard the first one, and then when the next guy came in and did it again, back-to-back weeks.
Yeah,
I didn't know about it till after the second one. Hey, we got to move on this. There are now resources available for checking for plagiarism. I use Grammarly now, and I do, whenever I write anything, I punch the button that says do a plagiarism check. It goes over billions, if not billions, of websites across the world, and it checks and it says, 1% of your content matches this, or sometimes it's 0%. I don't think it's ever been about 1%, but it helps me to know, was there something in my mind that I put on pieces of paper or that I typed onto digitally that I didn't actually attribute to someone else, and I should have. So there are resources out there.
Grammarly is an excellent tool for checking for plagiarism. You need to know grammar to use Grammarly, because some of its grammar suggestions are, you just need to do the hard work yourself there when you're writing. You can't rely on Grammarly for all of the grammar, but it's a great tool, and I think it's best the best part of the resource is the plagiarism check. I run just about everything I do through that plagiarism check as well.
Well, and you're right. Just as a side note on Grammarly, I cannot slow down enough for every one of their suggestions. Look, I'm going to go in and confess this to the world. Sometimes I write in the passive voice. I just want to confess that sin right now, and I am just not going to. I'm not going to change anything on that. So we're going to look at it.
Yeah, and then the last thing that we'll say here is just consider preparing your sermon first with no outside aids. So read the text, formulate your own thoughts around the text, create an outline, put some things on paper, and then go and use other resources. And frankly, that's probably one of the best ways to avoid plagiarism is just put your own thoughts first and then use others to help solidify the sermon as opposed to driving the sermon. When you use other people's work to drive your sermon, that's when plagiarism is more likely to take place.
And the drive is the operative word there, Sam. Start the sermon with prayerful thoughts that God has given you about the text. I know many pastors, and I do this when I prepare a sermon, many pastors read over the text again and again and again. And prayerfully, they're saying, God, let me see this as you would want me to see it. They write their notes down. They have a rough outline. Then they go to the other sources at that point. And that is one of the ways to protect them. So I think these are good suggestions on a really, really a contentious topic, unfortunately. I mean, we shouldn't be doing it, but it's a contentious topic. And it's just something where if you get into the habit of some of these habits that we have suggested, you can avoid the pain that will come when you do plagiarize a sermon. So, Sam, thank our sponsor. Love William Vanderbloemen, love what he is doing, and heard of another church that just landed a great pastor because of William.
Yeah, boy, they did. And Vanderbloemen, the church that I'm thinking of, I'm sure we're thinking of the same one, got a really good one. And Vanderbloemen did some great work there. And also follow William on social media. He's a funny dude. So Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, you need to be, even if you're thinking I'm not in the market for what they offer, you need to be in the know with what Vanderbloemen is learning. And they have content too. So it's not just a service that they provide. They put out a lot of content as well. So I would encourage you to follow William Vanderbloemen on all of the stuff that he does from a social media perspective. And from the services that they offer, if you are a church, school, nonprofit, values-based business, or family office, Vanderbloemen would be honored to serve you. Their team's goal is to empower yours by aligning your people solutions for growth. So they do hiring, compensation, succession, and culture, among many other things. So hire the right people, pay them well, plan for the future, build a culture that lasts, and you can learn more at vanderbloemen.com. Thanks again for joining us today here on Rainer on Leadership. Be sure to watch on YouTube or subscribe on iTunes. You can go to Google Podcast as well, Spotify, or whatever your favorite podcasting app is, and join us online at churchanswers.com, where we are growing healthy churches together.